This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview. Well, welcome back on to the Research Talks podcast with Alan Green. How are you doing, Alan? It's a frosty Saturday morning over here.
Yeah, it's actually not quite so frosty here. It was freezing cold yesterday. It was -2, -3 at 9 o'clock in the morning. So, but it's still cold this morning. But the weather's warming up, and apparently we're going to get rain, storms, the usual fare back again tomorrow, which is wholly depressing. But there we go. One of those things.
One of those things, yeah. Well, yeah, okay, well, there we go. That's what it is. I mean, I do, I get the feeling it feels brighter anyway. It certainly feels that, we're still a way off from spring, but you kind of get that I get that energizing feeling, certainly on the anticyclonic blue sky days there. If it's frosty, you just feel like it's just better than the wet, sort of overcast, isn't it? It's just a bit miserable and dull when it's like that. When it's the more anticyclonic fresh days, you just feel, ooh, okay, yeah, it's nice. Bright light. I can feel energy in the air. So like those shoots of spring.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And very fortunate down here. We've got this fantastic walk over Seaford Head, which I do, and I do at high speed over the weekends. And you've got that amazing view down towards Burling Gap, Beachy Head, and when the sky's bright blue, as you say, there's anticyclonic conditions. There's no better place to be.
Indeed. Well, let's talk about a few companies then that have had some news this week. So Fulcrum Metals, first of all, then we'll talk about Power Metal Resources, and then we'll finish off with Anglesey. So if we start with Fulcrum then, of course, they had some nice news regarding their uranium portfolio.
They did indeed. Well, of course, Fulcrum IPO'd just on a year ago. In fact, raised 3 million, came to market, and they've had a pretty good year, all things considered. The portfolio of assets owned by Fulcrum includes the Big Bear project, which is called formerly Panther, the Jackfish project, the Winston Lake, Beaver Trap and Carib Lake, the Wawa project, and of course in Saskatchewan we have the Charlotte and Neely Lake uranium project, which it was very much in the headlines this week. The companies, of course, provided an update right at the end of last year, the 6 months summary of activities, exploration programs conducted across the group's Big Bear and Jackfish projects at the within the Schreiber-Hemlo belt, and of course initial exploration results there confirmed the Big Bear project prospectivity. Rock samples there, some 45 grams per ton gold, 37 grams per ton gold, and 33.6 grams per ton. So a really good start straight off there. Also, the company announced the acquisition of the Tully Gold project, and that had an established mine camp and infrastructure. A historic resource of 107,000 ounces of gold. And once that was brought into the camp, that became straight away Fulcrum's most advanced project. But of course, the company during that time steadily increased its acreage and footprint in Saskatchewan. And indeed, kicking the year off on the 15th early this week, the company announced the results of prospecting at the Charlotte Neely and the Fontaine Lake properties in Saskatchewan. Charlotte Neely delivered 48 rock samples assaying up to 5,680 parts per million uranium, and that's a bumper result by any standards. That's a substantial step forward in identifying the source and also the extent of the uranium on site there. Potential there for unconformity style uranium mineralization, deposits that are known to be larger and higher grade. At Fontaine Lake, an even better result, 14 samples there, assaying up to just over 7,000 parts per million. Again, both confirming that there is substantial and large large deposits of high-grade uranium within the region. And indeed, Fontaine Lake is comparable in many ways to the Rossing deposit in Namibia. And of course, you spoke to Ryan earlier in the week,
Hmm.
Mark, and noted his comments. It's highly successful results, and of course, there's a great deal of excitement now. You're on the ground there, you confirm those grades, and this area is now considered to be one of the leading uranium districts in the world. It does see Fulcrum very well positioned to capitalize going forward. So there are so many things going on, and I think Ryan and his team have really managed the business well against the backdrop of an extremely challenging environment for junior explorers. And we've seen a good start there. Indeed, looking at the share price performance over the year, we saw the high at 19p, 19p, sort of just after the IPO last year. Coming back steadily, we saw a share price trading 15p in July last year, and we've seen a steady build, a series of higher lows. Indeed, the share price has just tripped up to it's come back up to 16.25p, which is certainly that's a 6-month high for the share price. So I think backed by news like this going forward, I think if investors are looking at Fulcrum Metals now, I think could be a very good entry point for to come into the company as the work program accelerates.
Yes, well, I was very pleased to see that news from Saskatchewan, as you mentioned there. Of course, given the theme very much at Resourcing Tomorrow back in November was uranium. It was a very hot commodity. I think it's even gone up higher. I think it was around about $80 per pound. I think it is back then, and it's now over 100. So it's gone up sort of fivefold really fairly recently, and the predictions are for it to continue to rise because quite simply, and as Ryan told me in the interview, that two of the biggest producers of uranium, which is Cameco, which is a well-known company, and Kazatomprom, which is over in Kazakhstan, they've basically said they cannot fulfill their obligations. So it's not like they even can't take on new orders, if you like, new contracts, but they can't even fulfill the ones they've got with the supply of uranium. So there's definitely a supply squeeze coming on, and I think
There is, yeah.
uranium it's I think only a month ago the European Union classed uranium power, that is, as a green energy source. So I was like, finally, it's being recognised as a green source of power. And Ryan actually gave me a fact. He said the waste uranium for one person in their entire lifetime would fit into a Coca-Cola can. So that would be basically one's footprint, if you like, if they powered their whole life through uranium. Now, of course, it's a lot, when you add it all up. But compare that to the carbon footprint. Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it's a very completely different story here. And as long as it's stored correctly, and we've advanced so much on uranium safety. There's in recent, it's been around for a while, I think, but there's more recent renewed interest in like modular reactors. So similar to what you get in the submarine, those nuclear little mini ones that power a sub. Well, instead of having big nuclear plants, more sort of localized SMRs, small modular reactors. So I think it's finally happening, and finally, because 20 years ago at school, my geography teacher, we were talking about green power, and she said the government cannot plug the gap before we get onto all completely renewable, i.e. wind, solar, etc. They're not going to plug the gap with anything if they want to get off the coal. The only answer is uranium. So that was 20 years ago, and finally, it seems like it might be cottoning on. And with the EU saying that, I think that's a really, really good vote of confidence there for the future of uranium. And yes, it is early stage with Fulcrum, but looking good as an early stage. You know, that non-conformity there at Charlotte Nearly Lake, high grade. That's what you want to find. That's what Forum Energy Metals reckon they found. They're in
Yeah.
exactly the right area there for uranium deposits. And
Yeah,
Fontaine Lake having more lower grade but higher tonnage. So yeah, I'm
indeed.
very pleased to see that news from Fulcrum there to be able to secure a good bit of uranium in their portfolio at this point in time is was a good move by Ryan, I think.
It was a very good move, but I think just taking up your point about these small scale nuclear reactors, this is something BAE Systems have been working on for a number of years, you know,
Okay.
and these smaller reactors will power towns, counties,
Mm,
cities. They're quicker to put into place, quicker to set up, but it is the only answer, frankly. You know, we have net zero targets to meet as a nation, as a planet, and right now, uranium is the only fast track way of getting us there. And of course, we all know what the risks are with uranium, but so long as it's handled carefully and so long as it's sited carefully, and another point is, you know, we talked about the US being protectionist in regard to its sources of materials like tungsten, like uranium, and so on. And of course, this is in Saskatchewan in Canada, which is you know, it's Canada and the US, isn't it? So straight away the US will be looking to domestic resources, although of course it is Canada, it's still on the same continent. As it looks to shut down its supply from China going forward.
indeed. Well, thank you, Alan. Let's talk a little bit about power metal resources then, and some of their recent news, particularly with relation to what's going on in Saudi.
Indeed. Well, Power Metal, of course, have we've discussed Power Metal on a number of occasions, and I've put together a, a a project valuation. Well, I think a sum of the parts valuation based on what each individual project is worth in the marketplace. And I was encouraged recently to see Charles Archer with in his position at Resolve Research had done the same.
Mm,
And of course there are so many assets within the Power Metal portfolio. It's pretty hard to know where to start. But what Charles has done with that research note, he's actually zeroed it down. So Power currently trading at 0.73 of a pence. They're off their lows, which were from July last year, where the stock's trading around 0.5p, starting to build back up again. But that gives the company a market capitalization of 14.5 million sterling. And Charles and Resolve Research have argued an initial valuation of 3.3p, which is you know in the region. Well, it's certainly well ahead of the valuation that we're currently seeing. Based largely, you know, we're continuing on the uranium theme. Of course, there's the Athabasca Basin uranium portfolio that Power Metal owns. There are 16 properties there, and of course, the company's now preparing its uranium portfolio, packaging the all of the assets together into an IPO launch within the first half of the year. And these assets combined together will constitute the largest uranium portfolio held by a London listed company. And of course, at a time, you know, as we've said, Mark, when uranium prices are very much on the rise. Um, so so in terms of the other projects and the other value inflection points we're going to see this year, we've spoken, of course, recently about golden metal resources.
hmm
You know, I was talking about the US protectionist approach to supply earlier. Gold Medal, of course, owned the Pilot Mountain project in Nevada, which has a 12.5 million ton JORC resource, the tungsten. And Power Metal owns 62% of golden metal resources. So, of course, any success from golden metal, and there's good strength showing in the GMET share price at the moment. We're seeing, you know, based on not only the developments of Pilot Mountain, but also some substantial developments at the Golconda project. They've identified a third opportunity there. The Garfield project, the Stonewall project, and yeah, the valuation of Power Metal is indeed rising steadily. And you know, given, as I said, China's ban of or the ban on Chinese exports by the US of materials like tungsten is going to see domestic projects, or indeed projects on the same continent, really rise to the top in terms of their importance, and their strategic importance to the US, and of course will drive both the share prices up at the same time. So the other companies that Power Metal has an interest in, we have First Class Metals, of course. Spoken to Mark Sale many times, as you have, Mark. Power Metal still own a 23% interest in the spin-off. Of course, the most recent developments being at the Zigzag Lithium project, where we're seeing promising results come out of the ground. And indeed, Mark Sale pointed out that every single piece of core that came out of the ground in the initial drilling campaign was rich with pegmatite. So of course that's the lithium bearing element that everyone is seeking. We then come to further IPOs that are scheduled for this year. Of course, before I turn to the Power Metal's own projects, I mentioned Iron Battery Resources. That's the subsidiary of Power Metal, which owns the Northwind, Orthia North, and Dirksen Bay graphite and lithium projects. And so it's a battery metals package within Canada. We may see that come to market later this year. But of course, one of the long delayed IPOs that we've been expecting, First Development Resources, in which Power Metal owns a 58.5% stake, is planning to launch its IPO this year. But based on the weak market conditions, that IPO has been delayed. But of course, the Wallal project in Western Australia now looks very promising. The company identified a magnetic target, which was very similar to Greatland Gold's Havieron asset. A big magnetic bullseye was identified there. And indeed, First Development Resources also secured co-funding from the Western Australian government, which has offset the drilling costs there in Wallal. And again, a uranium potential for rare earths, lithium, uranium, also at the Celta project as well, which is thought to be contiguous with the company called Arafura's rare earth Nolens project within the region too. So again, that's going to be coming to market as the year progresses. Then, of course, we have the company's own assets, and I'm not going to go through all of those, but of course, Malopo Farmers project. We remember last October, the company announced discovery of a conductor, again, a jelly bean conductor. First drill hole went straight down and discovered sulfides. So a lot of developments expected on along those particular routes. But then, of course, with the continued drilling is going to be scheduled for the for Q1 this year. Power Metal currently finalizing negotiations to get a drilling team in place there. So we'll find out more about Malopo Farms as we go forward. And Power Metal has an 87.7% interest there going forward. Then we have its 100% owned Tati asset, seeing third-party interest. There's a big 8-kilometer gold trend there, greenstone gold trend, and the company's considering undertaking a reverse circulation or even possibly a diamond drilling campaign. But again, great potential going forward. So Resolve Research have a target price of 3.3p, and indeed, when I spoke about the company earlier this year and put some of the parts projects together, I thought the assets, although they may have come down in value at that point, were worth at least 30 million, which of course gives us really doubles the share price from where we are to 1.5p. But I think certainly once these IPOs come to fruition during the first half of the year, and we see further progress with Malopo Farms and indeed with Tati, I think we're going to see this nascent valuation that we've all been looking at for so long in power metal start to come to fruition.
Yes, indeed. And I think given the Saudi news recently as well, of course, Pau signing the MOU with the Saudis there, I think the
Yes.
Saudis are going. They're not messing around. They clearly putting the money where the mouth is and want to move diversify away from oil, or certainly use all the money they have from that industry and get into mining. And I think it's both ways. I think it's internal in terms of actually exploiting projects within country, but external as well, as is demonstrated by something like the MOU with POW. So they want to buy up some companies or some vehicles with a mix of projects that they can pick up and then put other projects in, or indeed, start putting a lot of money into the
Yeah.
ground on these projects. So you buy a portfolio. We're not saying this obviously hasn't happened, but hypothetically, buy a portfolio like POW, and you've got a lot of access to different projects there at fairly different stages. So I
Absolutely.
think the
Yeah.
Saudis and that kind of area is going to be one to watch, just like Africa as a continent for exploration is going to be very much in the forefront of everyone's minds going forward. I think in the industry, I think the Saudis sort of seem to have come out of nowhere, but I think they're definitely going to be one where a lot of the money and investment's going to be coming from, but also going into. So it's a very nice, again, sort of vote of confidence for the sector in general. So was very pleased to see that Power sort of on that immediately. I mean, again, at Resourcing Tomorrow, the Future Minerals Forum, which is a Saudi initiative, had a very big presence there.
Yeah.
So the future is looking good for
Well,
mining and
it is.
exploration.
It is, and I think just on that on the power asset or the power metal asset portfolio, it's such a diverse portfolio of assets. In many ways, it offers defensive qualities that perhaps stocks with single or a few assets perhaps don't offer so well. But Sean Wade has done. He's made great progress really since Paul stepped down as CEO, since Paul Johnson stepped down as CEO. He's made great progress. Of course, he's bought Rick Rulin and the Turmoil vehicle as a cornerstone investor for the company, and now this memorandum of understanding with MISA, the Ministry of Investment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to develop these assets. Those are significant steps forward, and it just really adds. A great deal of diversity to the power metal asset portfolio, and in the same way, in that regard, it adds a very strong defensive nature to the asset as well. But I think once these IPOs start to progress, once we hear further news, perhaps from this memorandum of understanding with the Saudis, I think we're going to see the share price really start to push back, and we should be well above 1p, I would think, by the summer.
Well, let's see what happens. So let's now talk about Anglesey Mining then, Alan. What's the latest over there?
Well, Anglesey is a fascinating work in progress, and as members or listeners may have noted, I interviewed Joe Badasil, who is the CEO. He stepped down as CEO at Christmas. He was offered a role as managing director of Silver Mines in Australia, where he now is, but he remains a board director overseeing the handover at Anglesey. But if you watch the interview, which was some 40 minutes long, you'll see Joe has this encyclopedic knowledge of Anglesey and the opportunities there. And I went on a site visit with a number of analysts in December to look at the Paris Mountain mine and the asset. And of course, we were in the core shed. There's an historic mine there. The old open pit mine has been used. It was several hundred years ago the world's largest copper mine. All activity ceased at the start of the 20th century, but the open pit mine, of course, was left. It's now become a visitor destination, so you can go and park up and walk around this incredible lunar landscape, and that landscape has been used for film sets. Mortal Kombat 2 was used for, and various others. And then, then to the north of that, you've got the original mining infrastructure and the shaft. And from that, and from that, and from the work that's been undertaken over the past few years, this VMS was discovered under the ground to the north, just to the north of the old open pit mine. So what Joe and the team have been doing is undertaking so drilling work was undertaken there previously, but the some of the initial drilling results can't be relied on. So the team have restarted this work. So uh, they've identified two zones: the Garth Daniel zone and the White Rock and Engine zone, and then a third zone, the Northern Copper zone. And indeed, that's currently where the focus is. This VMS is thought to extend, and Joe said they've with the initial drilling work that's been done, there were contacts all the way along a 600 meter length, and it's thought that the VMS could extend to a good kilometer underground. But what's exciting is the core that we saw in the sheds, and indeed you can see on the announcement and on social media, you can see some images of that core. Came up trumps in the results as we hoped it would. The Garth Daniel zone we saw some 22 meters at 3.7 copper equivalent. And also other examples, 4 meters at 5.2% copper equivalent. Other intersections, 11 meters, and the Northern Copper Zone at 3.6, 1.3% copper equivalent, and so on and so on. So there is a huge amount of copper down there, and these are around a depth of 560 meters, where the VMS runs underground and has been identified. If you go to the company website, you'll see the latest presentation that was put out in December, and there are several slides there that show these multiple target horizons across the Garth Daniel zone, the Central Zone, and the Northern Copper Zone, and the sheer scale of the VMS that the company is drilling into. And there's also a potential high grade extension along the southern contact point, which Joe was discussing in the interview. And indeed, it's hoped that this will um, this will deliver further results as the infill drilling results come back. The company's currently about three to 400 meters down on hole 2, and once that core comes out of the ground and is assayed, then we'll get a picture of and we'll be able to firm up and confirm the extensions to the zone, which will then provide the basis to substantially increase the estimates from the preliminary economic assessments for the PFS. And of course, once the PFS is completed, then I think we're going to be very much at the races. We're going to see Anglesey's Paris Mountain project become a major copper asset, and indeed, of course, that will create all sorts of employment within the region. In addition, it should attract an awful lot of funding too, because as Mark, we were at Resourcing Tomorrow, Minds and Money, and I spoke to Neil Elliott at Cornish Lithium. We were, of course, discussing the UK Infrastructure Bank investment there. £24 million came in, and I think once the PFS is published for Paris Mountain, I think we're going to see similar amounts of funding coming in from UK investors and organisations like the UK Investor Bank. But that's just my supposition. I've got nothing to back that up, but I think that's an inevitable part of the process. So the actual share price itself, if we look at Anglesey, the shares have recovered strongly since the end of November, when they were trading just over a penny. Currently trading at 1.8p. Company's got a market capitalization of just 7 million quid. Now, this is going to be worth many multiples of that. And if it were Paris Mountain alone, that to me would be an absolute standout, but it's not. The company also owns 49% of the Grängesberg iron ore project in Sweden, which where a PFS has been commissioned in conjunction with partners in Sweden, a post-tax net present value of 688 million, operating costs of $553 per ton, and cash flow post-tax of just over $2 billion, generating an average net cash flow annually of $130 million. So this is a huge plug and play project right there. Anglesey also have the first right of refusal to increase their stake to 50.25% and 100%. So this is very much this is very much a value-backed asset, and I'm sure that we're going to be hearing a lot more about the partnerships for Grängesberg as we go forward. Thirdly, and finally, the company has a 12% stake in Labrador iron ore mines in Canada, in Quebec, in Canada. And during 2011 to 2013, this asset produced 3.6 million tons of iron ore. So there is an asset there that's producing. That project is developing, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that during the year. But basically, for a £7 million valuation, you've got those three assets. The most exciting one, the most exciting two are Grängesberg and Paris Mountain. But I think it's Paris Mountain where the focus is, given the interest in developing UK commodity assets and the focus that we saw at Resourcing Tomorrow last November.
Okay, well, thank you, Alan. Thank you very much for going through those companies with us today. So I wish you a very pleasant weekend, and we'll see again what next week brings on the markets.
Indeed. Thank you, Mark.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.